Today I want to take a look at my Virtual Boy. If you don't know much about this console, it didn't go particularly well at launch. The system didn't sell many, it was a bit of a flop, probably Nintendo's biggest flop to date. As a system I think it was quite well made. Its technology rolled on from the Game Boy itself. It uses red LEDs, so all of the graphics are in red. This is Mario Tennis, one of the first games I played on the system. It does give a good interpretation of the 3D effect. It shows you what the system is capable of. It's quite an enjoyable game to play. I quite like it because you play against the computer opponents. The skill level is quite good. It's quite easy to pick up, but it is quite hard to master. But you know, an enjoyable game, and this is what it should look like on the system. These consoles are starting to age now, and they're starting to get problems. The Virtual Boy is no different. It was never really designed to last this long. And they become an issue with the ribbon cable adhesion not transferring data properly, and this is the problems, the visual problems you start to experience. There is a guy called Segasonicfans who's designed a repair board, and this is what this video is about, installing that. This is what you get in the post. This is not the latest incarnation of this design. I believe he has just released a new design to hopefully make this installation a bit easier. It is a little bit fiddly. It isn't an entry-level mod. It does require some quite intricate soldering and a lot of patience. So there's 3 parts to each lens. You've got the main connecting board, like a little daughter board that solders on at a right angle, and then these are the ribbon connectors that you need to solder on to those boards provided. There is an installation service if you're not, okay with doing this sort of level of soldering yourself. He does offer an installation service, and so do other people now. So let's get into it. First things first is to get all of the bits out of the Virtual Boy. This is your normal sort of game bit driver. You're going to need to undo the screws that hold the back case on. Once that's removed, there's a couple of talks there that I'm going to take a slightly different tack. The actual designer of this does do his own video, and he does do a better job than I do. So I've decided to extract this little plastic carrier to use it as a jig. In the new incarnation, he does provide a jig that you 3D printed, so you can forego stripping this down this far, and it's a lot safer. You don't melt your game, the Virtual Boy and the bits on it. So because I haven't got that, I've decided to take this off and use this as like a daughter board that I can mount everything to, and then align everything. Because that's the biggest trick with this, is aligning all the boards together and making sure everything's perfectly aligned, else you do end up with some issues. Just retrieving the lost screw there. So there's a few precursors to installing this. Like I say, you've got to build the board yourself unless you employ him to do it or somebody else to do it for you. The ribbon connector needs to go on first. So the best way of approaching this is to just put a little bit of solder in the corner, into one corner. Basically align up the ribbon connector, and then just tack on one end, because there is a little bit of metal end on the edge of the ribbon connector, and just tack it on very slightly, and then have a good look round and make sure everything's aligned and all the pins are all aligned with the actual board. As you can see, I'm not really 100% happy with that, so I'm just going to move it very, very slightly. I'm going to say it's easily done. If you only got one piece tacked on, it's quite easy just to melt that solder again and just give it a little tweak, just so you're happy with where it is. Because once you've soldered it all in, it's virtually irremovable. You're going to near enough destroy it taking it off, so it's worth taking the time to make sure you're happy with it all in line. And then once you are, then just tack the other end in. Just keep it nicely held down so all the pins touch. Once you're happy with that, then we just apply some flux there, because we're going to do a bit of drag soldering on this, so we need a lot of flux just to allow all those pins to get nicely tinned and nicely lubricated there, so that it all flows well and we don't get any bridge contacts. And what we basically do is just fill your iron with a nice load of solder and then drag it across. Don't worry if you get any bridge contacts at this moment, because what you're going to do, you're basically dragging the solder across all the pins, and the flux is going to help load and unload that. As you drag it across, you're loading and unloading those pins with solder. And any, to be fair, any bridge contacts, normally if you've got a nice amount of flux on there, those bridge contacts will just unbridge and it'll flow nicely. So a bit of a brief clean up and then a closer inspection. There is a couple of bridge terminals there that I'm just going to deal with. But once you've got that in there, you move on to the right angle board. Now, same applies. There's a little line that he's put on the board so you can align everything nicely. And then again, just tack the ends and have a good inspection. Make sure that everything's aligned nicely before you obviously do the main soldering. This doesn't take too long, but again, it's better off taking your time and making sure everything's properly aligned, because once you've got it all soldered in, it's very much a nightmare to get anything to move. So once you're happy with everything, nice layer of flux there, then just finish off tacking all the corners. Just so that nothing moves when you actually do the main soldering. It's quite a nice design. It's well made. The boards are quite chunky and well made. You're not really going to rip any pads or do any damage here. So your iron temperature needs to be fairly hot. I think I've got it sort of like 350, 400. You want to get a nice amount of penetration there when you're soldering this to the actual Virtual Boy LED lens. So that's nicely tacked in. I'm just going to try and find the best position for the camera here, just to really let you get a good view of what I'm doing, if you're brave enough to take this on. So again, you don't have to be too worried at the moment if you've got any bridge contacts. So basically all we're doing is just dragging and moving that solder along to all those other pins. As the solder moves along and goes to the unpopulated pins, it sucks the solder off the soldering iron. So when you return to some of the pins that may be bridged or they're quite heavily loaded, it just basically moves that and sucks that solder onto the next pin. So this dragging effect is quite handy. You end up with a nice amount of loaded pins. And I've got one there that's been quite stubborn, but just moving the soldering iron over and unloading the soldering iron onto the obviously unsoldered pins, and eventually it'll all come into play. And so get everything nice and wet, moving it all over. Just keeping an eye out, making sure everything's got a nice layer on there and everything's nicely connected, because these are the main data lines, so we don't want anything bridged here. So there's the finished article. Really nicely done there, so I'm quite pleased with that. That looks great. That's nice and sturdy. That's never going to come to bits. The basic principles between this and the later kit are quite the same. This is quite easy. Just basically pull it off. There's no solder really to lift any of the pads. It's just glued on. There's like an adhesive. That's one of the reasons why it's actually failed. The connection between the two can fail, and also the quality of the actual ribbon cable. I've seen it where some of the ribbon cables have been it's gone corrosion actually in the ribbon cable itself. So the biggest trick with this is not to overload the pins. I'm just getting rid of the bit of silicone they'd used to glue it together, but the trick here is not to overload the pins. So bit of flux, go over all the pins, make sure there's a nice layer, but not to put too much on. Right, so then mount the LED array into the holder, and then offer up the Segasonic's designed bracket. And what we're trying to do here is perfectly align everything up. So again, tin everything ready. Don't put too much on. I think the biggest thing I've learned with this is not putting too much on, because it can squish out and it gives you bridged contacts, and that can be a nightmare to get rid of. So what I'm doing here is just basically doing an initial clamping, if that were the best way to call it, where I'm just soldering the wires, and then go over each one in turn, giving a good amount of heat, and you end up with a nice connection. So I'm just having a look under the microscope here, just to see what sort of connections I've got. There's a bridge terminal there to the keen-eyed ones of you. I will go back and remove that, because I did find it, because once you've soldered everything into place, the best thing you can then do is go over with your multimeter set to audio, make sure you've got any bridge contacts there and go over them one at a time, like a ladder effect, going one at a time. And I did actually find a bridge on this board, as you've seen. If the keen-eyed ones of you there would have seen that there was a bridge a bit quite towards the right-hand side of this board. But once you're happy that everything's, the continuity is all good and everything looks nice and clean and you've got a nice good connection, you can refit it back into your Virtual Boy. And then it's just basically time to fit the ribbon cable. Now this doesn't fit perfect. It's been talked about quite a few times that it doesn't quite fit in perfect. So if you do yours and it is just slightly up on one side, don't worry about it. It doesn't cause a problem. So once you've got it connected into the virtual ribbon, just loop it round, plug it into the actual Virtual Boy daughter board, and just fold that over. Like you can see there, I'm just folding the excess under there, just so that it's not that it's bent, just that it's just a nice curve on the actual ribbon. And rinse and repeat on the other side. There's nothing different on either side, they're both identical. So once you get to this stage, obviously everything's ready to go. Pop the shell back on, get it all screwed together. Just reverse order of your screws you took apart, pop them in. The beauty of this is, there's nothing really complex to it. There's no clips or anything. It just literally, there are just two shells held together with torque screws. So nothing complicated here. Bang them back in. Not forgetting that one below the lens. Pretty much then, check that obviously you've got all those little connections can sometimes fall out if you disturb the main board. But just to double check, just to make sure everything they're working before we finish off. Then it's all down just to giving it a nice clean, a bit of a birthday. I'm just using some plastic cleaner here. I'm not using furniture polish or anything like this. I'm actually using plastic polish. Just before I put all the faceplate and all the bits and bobs back on. Fingers crossed, everything will be all working lovely jubbly. It's worth taking the time to make sure that all those connections are not bridged and anything like that, because it's a real pain if you want to take it back to bits. So there we go, it's all back good, and good for another 30 years, I hope. This has been a real test. It's not an easy mod, and like I say, this is what the end result is when you're looking at it. It's a shame when they go wrong, but these things obviously are getting old now. But if you made it this far, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you again in the next video. Bye for now.